Hey Wesley, I'm gonna give you some feedback on your rough draft. So you were concerned about length, and you're not quite sure how to expand. So I'm primarily going to talk about that because I think I see some good places to expand. Don't forget to include your header up here in the right hand corner, which is your last name, page number. That's just a small thing. I noticed this. I like your title. And I want to return to that idea towards the end of the paper because this might be something for you to actually expand on. Again, I remember when I read this the first time, I like this question that you start off with, and what the typical use of a map is for people, and then you pivot into talking about the political cartoon. I feel like there's a small gap in logic here, so this is a good place to expand. So you say typically we look at a map to align ourselves with the direction we want to go. I feel like there's a however moment here. So you need, I would say a good place to expand is to create a point of contrast, and that'll help you pivot into the talking about the image. So if we typically look at a map to align ourselves, what is the representation of the Democratic Party and Bernie Sanders doing in this cartoon, right? The exact opposite is happening, right? So consider how you could expand right here, that suggests the opposite. And maybe it's the idea of in 2020 there is no map that could easily show us a way out of the problems that we are facing, right? And that is the honest truth, right? And then of course, so you can take that broad context and then of course narrow it down into the specific context of the 2020 election. But I think expanding on a contrasting point right here would be good. Um, I recommend some flip flopping of some sentences here. The political cartoon shows an image of a donkey headed figure standing and sighing. I would bring this sentence up next. So the figure has realized he is lost. And then you can pivot into talking about the board. Does that make sense? Because you talk about figure, you talk about the board, and then you talk about the figure. You want to do your best to group like ideas together, meaning that paragraphs that cover like ideas should be next to one another in an essay, and sentences that are talking about like ideas should be next to each other in a paragraph on their own, as opposed to separated. The reader likes like information or similar information to be close together. So think about moving those around. Here's the gap for me as your reader. I think your thesis itself is fine, but to me, there's a big leap between Bernie Sanders and this donkey-headed figure. I know, and most readers will understand. Well, okay, I got what a political cartoon with a donkey-headed figure. I know that's a representation of the Democratic Party, but that's a big leap from talking about the Democratic Party in general to Bernie Sanders. So I think that before your thesis, if you tap into the clear struggle that Bernie Sanders faced as a candidate in the 2020 election, if you tap into that right here, your thesis is going to make more sense. And that will also give you a way to expand. Your description here is excellent. Your I think your analysis is working quite well. Um, I think that I think that your audience is good. Another way to expand, I would argue that I don't think it's Sanders alone. I would argue that it's the Democratic Party, period, that kind of feels that way right now, that there's a lot of stress on the party to get a win in 2020, but the way to get there was really unclear, because of all of the compounded pressure of 2020. So I think tapping into that, what makes the 2020 election so different than 2016? So 2016 meant a lot to people too, and the stakes were high. So I wouldn't argue that the stakes are higher in 2020. Like, I don't know, maybe we could argue that, but the stakes are definitely different, right? And so if you talked about the stakes in 2020, it would be, yeah, are we going to allow a oh, what's the word? A reality star to become president, and not just a reality star that, we know on record has said some extremely offensive and frightening things about women and about other minorities, versus a candidate with a lot of experience who would have also been the first woman president, right? So a lot of people who were excited about Clinton's election we're thinking about that glass ceiling being shattered, right? So those were the stakes there, and I think that those were important stakes. But think about how the stakes in 2020 are different, right? So does the country want 4 more years of Trump, and what does that mean? The pandemic is something else. The growing sense of nationalism and some of the problems, nationalism, I'd say nationalism and isolationism, excuse me, all those isms, and some of the problems that are related to that, right? That's what I think that you need to tap into. So it is the disheartening truth of Bernie Sanders' position, and then you might dig into that a little bit more as well. That Bernie was a very, although he in some people's opinion was a radical candidate, he was a candidate that had a lot of support. And really it kind of felt like what it came down to was the DNC felt that Sanders was too much of a risk, that he was too radical, right? I don't think that's ever been stated directly, but I think that has kind of been assumed by a lot of people. So I think digging into the disheartening truth of his position, along with what is so different and stressful and concerning about the 2020 election, could give you a way to expand, right? It was highly effective at making the point that Senator Sanders was feeling very lost before dropping out. And then I think if you think about the donkey as the figurehead for the entire party, how could you expand on that as well at this final moment? Like, how is that representation of how the entire party feels, but then also how maybe individual Democrats feel, right? So individual voters who align with that party also feel that way as well, right? Because the figurehead can represent multiple people at once, and you kind of tapped into that in the paper, but I think that might be something for you to tap into, like, right? It's like the entire party is doing one big collective sigh, like, ugh. Something else that you might play with is the idea of the title of the burn, right? So how can you have like a double meaning there, right? So the burn obviously refers to Bernie Sanders, like his slogan, right? Feel the burn, right? But how might what have happened to him not only in 2016 but also in 2020, that the DNC kind of turned their backs on him twice, how might that be a burn as well? Does that make sense? So you might play around with that double meaning there, that the burn is perhaps in this context no longer a rallying cry, right? Hey, feel the burn, get behind Bernie Sanders, let's support him. But it is really like a shun, right? Right? You've been stiff-armed or othered, or however you want to say that. So to me, it's primarily about expanding on the context, right? The political moment, and the moment of 2020, like really get into all of the stress and the pressure of 2020. So like I said before, you could talk about the pandemic. You need to talk about what 4 more years of Trump would look like for the country and what some of the concerns the party has for that. And then I think that you could also talk about, related to that as well, like, the United States position in the world, right? So 4 more years of Trump. I mean, what is that going to look like? Are we going to get further entrenched in this nationalism and isolationism? And what are going to be some of the consequences of that if that does indeed happen, right? That's why I think there's really no clear path there, and that's what this cartoon is tapping into. So a lot of good work here. And I think you're right. It's just expanding, and to me, it's expanding on the context. All right. I look forward to seeing the final draft, and let me know if you have any more questions. Thanks.